the grips I've seen are basically just a hammer grip.
Hammer grip.
They're shooting on the knuckle side, and
never on the other side.
Well, the Ishi shot on the other side. He was the one that used the kind of thumb drive.
That's right. You said.
Yeah, but again, he rotated the bow, so the arrow was sitting on top of the bow, and he was shooting like this.
Yeah.
But to say that nobody shot on the other side of the bow would be presumptuous, because we don't have enough information.
No, of course. And so mostly they used the bow for hunting, not for warfare.
No, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that they had a combined use of spears and bows. Some areas, I think they even used slings. Bows that we became aware of were primarily hunting bows. Okay. But the Lakota and people like that, when they were fighting the US Army, definitely used bows in warfare. Okay. And I think in the Iroquois and that, when they fought amongst themselves, they used bows. But they had other weapons, tomahawks, spears. I keep mentioning spears because spears are a very common weapon everywhere. But they had interesting clubs too. And it's interesting when I remember as a teenager reading a book on Plains Indian technology and reading about how they made their rawhide shields, which were multiple layers of rawhide. Now, these shields would be really good at stopping arrows. But, they were so big. So they clearly both used bows and arrows in warfare and developed techniques to combat them. When horses were introduced, bows became much more important in warfare. But it's important to remember from what I've read. This is not like I'm not an expert on this. From what I've read, they also used lances because they learned their horsemanship from the Spanish, and the Spanish were using lances, and they already had spears, so it was natural to say this is going to work. But they definitely used bows in horseback, and so go on.
And the arrowheads, they used stone arrowheads, obsidian. What type of stones did they use?
It depended on the availability, but there are agate arrowheads.
Wow.
Jasper, flint, chalcedony, definitely bone. There were wooden arrowheads used as blunts for bird hunting. There was a type of arrowhead where they put two pieces of thin wood through the end of the arrow and tied them in with sinew to make like shooting birds on the wings, like a big, not a blunt, because it was like almost like a net. It didn't catch them and hit them, for shooting small birds and that. So there was a lot of techniques in making arrowheads. When take for example this tiny little bird point type arrowhead, which
this is an original one, correct, Bede?
This is about 800 or 900 CE. This is very old. This is not like later arrows. This is quite a big arrow. You can see the binding where the foreshaft is joined with the reed main shafts. And yes, by reed, it's probably a Rondo Donax or things like that. It's got stains on it from tar and that. It was found in a cave in the Pueblo areas.
Yeah.
And there's not very much indication. It may have been flexed. Some of this stuff is actually coming off of my hand. It may have been fletched, very short fletching, because there's two bindings. But there's no indication, because they didn't glue down the feathers, there's no indication of where the feathers were, if there were any feathers. This is such a long arrow, it could have been used without feathers. Yeah, it's got a kind of pitch or tar and just the heat of the light is softening it a bit. So that might have been rubbed on the whole shaft to waterproof it. But after, you know, like 1,200 years, it's not, you know, in that brilliant a condition. I'm surprised it was so straight. When it was given to me, I was, well, first of all, I was surprised it was so old.
Can I see the arrowhead on it, please?
Yeah, sure. Just try and keep away from them.
What kind of material is it?
I think it's a kind of flint.
Oh, it's flint. Okay.
Yeah, it's very fine.
Did they also use obsidian?
Yes.
Yes.
Whatever was available. Strangely enough, there's quite a lively community of people making stone arrowheads in America, both European and Native American people. And there's been a lot of experimentation with different types of stone and things like that. It seems to be you would find the best stone in your area, and that's what you would make your arrowheads out of. Sometimes I would imagine there would be trade in suitable stones, because in Australia there was trade between the Aborigines before Europeans came for particularly good stone for making spear points out of. And it went over quite long distances. So and it happened in Neolithic Europe as well. So I'm sure that the Americans were doing it too.
And they also used later on the trade items like iron arrowheads.
So they would cut up pieces of iron and then mount them the same way as you'd mount a stone arrowhead. Though they've made like a short tang. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
So the end of the shaft is split, and then that's all bound on.
Yes.
In archery supply places like I think Three Rivers Archery and places like that, you can actually buy those points and make totally accurate replicas. Sometimes these were actually sold as arrowheads to Native American people by traders who traded them for furs or things like that. And other times, old pieces of scrap metal were converted into arrowheads by the Native American people themselves. Because, you know, when they first saw metal, in the Northwest, they had experience of copper, but metal wasn't as common in the rest of North America. And at first, they would have basically treated it like stone. I mean, you can scratch iron with a stone tool, so it's possible to cut out an iron arrowhead with stone tools. It's not very efficient, but it can be done. But once Europeans realised that you could make this stuff and trade it to the Native Americans, well, you know, it's just business.
Did they melt the copper ore to gain copper to make arrowheads?
Well, I know that the Northwest tribes made copper objects. I can't specifically say they were making specifically for arrowheads. They definitely made copper pendants and things like that, and maybe needles. I'm not sure.
I saw a dagger. I don't know if it was ceremonial or not. I don't know. Maybe my memory fails me.
They may have actually made short swords. Again, this is amongst, but this group, these people were very unique in a lot of their cultural things. So whether they developed this all by themselves, I don't know. I think they did. I don't think they, because remember, further down into South America, the people in Peru and that, and I say people rather than Incas because it's pre-Inca, were making bronze to make tools and even surgical tools.
Yes.
And there was some in Central America, in Mexico, they were making copper tools, some rare bronze ones. They weren't like common. It wasn't like there was a big industry in metallurgy. It was a valuable thing, and I think if you made a copper arrowhead, that would be a sign of, you know, how important you were that you had it, rather than you thought it was a good arrowhead for going hunting or killing your neighbor who.
Just one more question. How old is that arrow you shot with an iron arrowhead?
That's from the late 1800s.
Okay, another question. Did they use any arrowhead made of steel?
I think if they could get it, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how. See, this is. I don't know if I can tell really. This is not very soft.
Okay.
So it may have a little bit of carbon. I don't want to put too much pressure on it because it's old. I think that low carbon steel, if it was available, would be easy to work for them.
Yeah.
Into arrowheads, or they could have been sold.
Yeah.
You know, low carbon steel arrowheads made by white people commercially.
And did they have different shapes, arrowheads?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's lots of different shapes. I'm just wondering if we'll just look at the variety of shapes just on the cover of that.
Oh God, okay, I see that. Yeah, I think it answers my question quite well. Yeah, they did.
So it's everything from blunt to leaf shape to notch to serrated edged.
Yes.
Again, this is quite a sophisticated culture when it comes to arrowheads. But for some reason, arrowheads have always been a thing of great variation. All cultures that had archery made multiple types of arrowheads.
It's true. And you also, in the beginning, before I started recording, you showed me another book which has a series of books. Can I see that? Can you see?
Yeah. This is a traditional Bowyer's Bible.
Yeah.
Now there's 4 volumes that I have.
How many volumes are there?
I think I thought a 5th one was coming out, but I haven't got it yet.
Okay.
These are all by multiple authors, so there'll be a chapter on a specific subject, like bowstring making, and then they'll go through all the ways that people made bowstrings, how you can make bowstrings, how strong this material is, how strong that material is, and the bow making sections are also quite detailed. This covers both Native American. There's a bit of stuff on African. There's discussions of lots of different types of bows. I think I'm just again. There's enormous detail in structures of bows, and how knots are applied, how to make glues. There's a really good section on animal glue that any bow maker would love. There's lots of it's mainly talking about let me see. Okay, remember we were talking about the horn and sinew bows that didn't have a weak core?
Yeah. Ah, okay.
So, yeah. So this is Dr. Grayson, and these are really strange. The closest outside of North America is the horn bows made in Indonesia, but they don't have a sinew backing on them. They're very specialized types of bows, but again, 70, 80 pounds, not unusual for that type of bow. It's heavy for a hunting bow. And they were probably prestige bows as well. I mean, you know, you don't go to that much trouble just for practicality. This is this is somebody showing off how wonderful a craftsman they are. I mean, they're quite workable bows. And I saw, I mean, there are Native American people today that are making too, because I saw some people who'd made some, and they kind of showed them to me, and I was, you know, it's good craftsmanship. It's a very hard thing to make one of those bows, because it's not like composite bows with the wooden core makes it much easier to make a composite bow than having one with no core.
Yes. And the bowstring, which material did Native American use to make the bowstring?
They used virtually everything you can imagine. So they had fiber bowstrings made from flax and things like that. Whatever the plant material that they made thread from in that area. They also made them out of sinew, which is remarkably strong. In fact, stronger than any bow that they were going to put it on. And they also made them of rawhide, twisted rawhide strips. So anything that, the only thing that it didn't make them out of were things that they didn't have, like silk. But they were invented. Quite a lot of the older bowstrings are thicker than you would think that you would want a bowstring to be. And you can tell this, even if you don't have the bowstring, by looking at the nocks and how wide they are. I've seen some of the sinew strings I saw were much thicker than I would have thought necessary, and the plant fiber ones too. And my guess is that was for safety, like you didn't want your bowstring to break.
Yeah.
So you made it stronger than it had to be, and just used a heavier bow to get the velocity you needed. I don't think. I mean, there were distance shooting competitions, but I don't think it was a big thing to have a really long range. What was important was when you got close enough when you were hunting, you wanted to be able to punch the arrow right through the animal. And if you were at war, they didn't fight at long distance. They got in amongst one another, and they were shooting, you know, maybe from 20 or 30 yards, if that. And they did like shooting fast. I mean, I think the Hiawatha poem or something like that, Longfellow, talks about shooting multiple arrows into the air before the first one hits the ground. And this is a classic method of training to get fast shooting.
Yes.
So maybe that was you know, a part of their technique. But on the other hand, every arrow was handmade, so you didn't want to waste them. I think fast shooting was always the thing to take advantage of the opportunity that presented itself. Whether you're hunting and an animal just walks out from behind a tree, and you want to be able to draw and shoot in a second, or whether in warfare where a guy has got his shield up and he puts his head up to see what's going on, or if you can shoot straight away, then you're the one with the advantage.
That's true. Mm-hmm. Okay, another question I wanted to ask you: did they paint the bows, or were just simple bows?
Oh, yeah. Particular tribal groups had particular patterns that they like to use. See, the wood for the bows was often treated with things like bear fat, smoke inside their tents and their houses. And in the Pacific Northwest, often quite elaborate patterns painted up the bow. They all had, you know, meanings to the people doing them, and possibly had magical intentions to increase the power of the bow or its strength. The arrows were also decorated, so sometimes they'd be painted. Sometimes they'd have little grooves cut in the shaft, which were intended to make it more effective. I've seen one person who experimented with that and thought that by putting the grooves in the shaft, when you heated the wooden shaft to harden the wood, it made it more effective. I don't know if that's true. Certainly that person had that experience. You know, because you can do something doesn't mean people did do it.
Yes.
So you've got to always be careful. I mean, you know, it's very easy to get carried away with experiments.
2 last questions. What type of feather or plume did they use for the arrow?
They use things like eagle feathers, and I think some tribal groups didn't like certain feathers because they had bad magical or religious connotations. Goose feathers, I think, were used quite frequently. I'm not quite sure what these are. As you can see, they weren't glued to the shaft, they were tied on at both ends. And in fact, there's 2 different traditions of tying. One of them, they tie the feathers facing out to the nock and then bend them over and then tie the front ends down. And the other one is like this, where they basically, part of the feather has the webbing taken off, and that's what's underneath to continue wrapping. I think this one is, no, it's together the same one.
Okay.
So when you're actually putting it together, they're much tighter than that. But you know, with age and moisture and whatever, things get a bit looser.
Yes. And what kind of woods did they use to make the bow?
Okay, again, this depended on the area. They were very good at making arrows out of shoots. So there are a lot of plants in North America that produce straight shoots, sometimes hollow or just with light pith in them, dogwood and things like this, that are basically almost grown to make arrows. They're perfect for making arrows. In other places, they use reed for the body of the shaft and hardwood foreshaft.
Yes.
So the 3 arrows I've got here, 2 have a reed body or some kind of a rhododendron or something like that body, and the other one is a hardwood. When I say hardwood, it's probably a pine shaft. So essentially, whatever material within your area that would make good arrows, you would find out about, and that's what you would go hunting for. They bundled the shaft, they dried them, they straightened them. They knew how to use a hot rock to straighten a slightly crooked arrow shaft and all that kind of stuff. The workmanship is pretty good. I mean, just look again using O'Leary and Ham's book. When you have a look at, I'm just trying to find one that's actually showing a pattern shaft, because there's some where there's actually painted. There's some where the bow's painted as well. The problem with this is it's all black and white, so I can't tell you whether or not they've got very much painting on them. But here's an idea of some of the painting on a bow.
Okay.
So it's pretty sophisticated stuff. That is Algonquin. I mean, there's a little figure on the bow nock that's been carved into it. It's all quite. Here's one where they're painted. The arrows are painted between the feathers.
That's right. I see that.
I mean, it's kind of a full-on thing. I mean, you've got the quivers and the bow cases are decorated with braiding and beadwork and things like that, and everything to do with your bow was looked after. And if you could embellish it, and it was part of your tribal culture to embellish it, you would do it. And these are not just random designs. These designs would have a meaning to the people that did them. Whether they had a magical meaning or, you know, because they might be for good luck or something like that.
Okay. And Bede, the last question. If our viewers want to order a bow, traditional North American or Native American bow made by a Native American bow maker, is it a possibility to do that?
I think it is. I think that some of the Native American bowyers are selling their bows. I'm not quite sure how you'd find out. You'd probably there are things like the cultural associations of the different tribes would be the people to approach first, I think. But I think if you did a search on the internet, you might be able to find a few.
Okay.
Because
so you can find bowyers, Native American bowyers.
Yeah, and if you if you can't find one that's making the bow style that you're interested in, there may be a non-native maker in America making them, because there's a lot of European descended Americans very interested in this too.
Yes.
And because they're living down the road from somebody that knows how to do it traditionally, often they know a lot of the traditional practices. I mean, with any of these things, there's always people that pretend to know more than they do. But I think if you were, looking at if you went to, say, a Cherokee or a Lakota or a whatever, cultural association, and said, "Oh, I'm looking for a bow," they probably would be able to find somebody for you. I have no idea what the prices would be. When I was in the US before 2010, you could find bows in antique stores. Obviously not shootable because they were old, but that was fading out because there weren't a lot of them to start out with. And museums and people, from those areas were looking for this kind of stuff. So it was very hard to find. And, you can never be really sure if you're buying an antique one, if it's really from the culture that they say it's from, unless you've got a good background. It's not like there's a kind of list showing you all the different types of bows, and this is a 17th century Iroquois bow or whatever, Mohawk or this kind of stuff. It's not that well. Though somebody from one of those cultures will probably be able to tell you. This is where it's better to go to the source than it is, because there is a source. I mean, if we're talking about ancient Persian bows, we've got books and we've got bows, but we don't have any bow makers directly dependent.
Yes.
But in America, there's still bow makers, and they're part of the Native Americans are part of American culture now, and so it's a very commercial culture. I'm sure that there's ways of getting good quality Native American bows.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Bede. It was lovely talking to you on this subject. I appreciate all your comments and input for our viewers here. Thank you, Bede.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you.